Welcome to The Explainer. The carnivore diet is, well, it's everywhere, right? But here's the real question. Can it actually fuel an elite athlete through a brutal competitive season? And maybe even more importantly, what could it be doing to our bodies in the long run? We're going to dig into two recent scientific studies that give us some pretty surprising answers.
So let's just jump right into a high-stakes, real-world experiment. What actually happens when a top-tier college athlete decides to go all in on the carnivore diet, right in the middle of her competitive season? I mean, can an all-meat diet really replace carbs when you're pushing your body to its absolute limit?
Okay, so our first source is this fascinating paper from 2024, published in the Journal of Exercise and Nutrition. And what's so cool about this is that researchers followed a single athlete, like super closely, to see in real time how this diet affected her performance out on the field. This gives us a direct, data-driven look at the consequences.
So who are we talking about? Our subject is an 18-year-old NCAA Division II soccer player. And let me tell you, this is a seriously competitive level of sport. About a month before her season kicked off, she made a pretty radical change and went full carnivore. And this set up a fascinating, completely unintentional experiment.
As soon as the season started, the sports scientists, who were tracking her every move with GPS and heart rate monitors, they started to notice something was just not right. The data was crystal clear. To keep up with her teammates, her body was basically in overdrive, working way harder to produce the exact same results.
Now, to quantify this, they used a metric called TRIMP. It stands for Training Impulse, but you can really just think of it as a body strain score. It's pretty clever. It combines how long you work out with how high your heart rate is to spit out a single number that tells you the total stress of that workout on your body.
And boom, here's the hard data from the first half of the season. Just look at her TRIMP score on this slide, 240, while the team average was down at 205. Her GPS work rate was also way higher. I mean, the numbers don't lie. Her body was clearly under a lot more stress.
And to put that into perspective, her body strain score was nearly 15% higher than the team average. Think about that. For the exact same game, her system was under significantly more stress just to stay in the game. It was almost like she was running with the brakes on.
And this really hammers home the efficiency problem. She was burning over 8% more energy to cover the same ground as everybody else. You know, in elite sports, games are won and lost on the tiniest of margins. That is a massive, totally unsustainable difference.
So, seeing these numbers, a registered dietitian stepped in about halfway through the season. But instead of suggesting, some huge diet overhaul, the recommendation was incredibly small, almost surgical in its precision.
And get this, here was the intervention. It's so simple it's almost hard to believe. The athlete was already eating a little bit of fruit. The dietitian's only advice was, hey, eat it 1 hour before the game, not 2 hours before. That's it. No more food, just a tiny little shift in timing.
And the result? Whoa, it was immediate and it was dramatic. Her body strain, which had been almost 15% higher than her teammates, swung all the way down to nearly 10% lower than the team average. Her efficiency shot up by almost 4%. The change was just staggering.
So the really crucial point is this one. That tiny little timing tweak resulted in a total positive swing of nearly 25% in her body's efficiency score. She went from being one of the least efficient players on the team to one of the most efficient, and it happened practically overnight.
So what did the researchers themselves conclude? Well, it was clear and direct. For this athlete performing at such a high level, having even just a small amount of fast-acting carbs available right before a game was absolutely vital for her performance. Okay, so we've seen the immediate impact on performance, right? But this just opens up a much bigger question. If a few grams of carbs can have such a huge effect in the short term, what are the potential long-term consequences of a diet built almost entirely on animal products?
Yeah, this whole thing naturally leads to that broader question. If just a few grams of carbs can so drastically change performance, what does this science have to say about the long-term effects of a diet that's mostly animal-based foods, especially when we start talking about something like heart health? And to answer that, we're going to turn to a major scientific review from 2023. Now, this isn't just about big population studies. This paper dives into the nitty-gritty, down to the cellular and molecular level, to understand exactly how animal-based foods might be impacting our cardiovascular system.
The review talks about several different biochemical pathways. And while things like saturated fat and cholesterol are pretty well known, we're going to focus on a less discussed, but honestly, a totally fascinating pathway that starts with something called endotoxins.
This diagram from the paper kind of lays it all out. Over on the left, you've got animal food consumption. Way over on the right, cardiovascular disease. We're going to zero in on that top pathway, the one that kicks off with endotoxins.
So what in the world are endotoxins? Well, their technical name is lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. They're basically just little pieces of the outer wall of certain bacteria. The research shows they're found in pretty significant amounts in a lot of animal products, and, this is the important part, they can survive both cooking and the super acidic environment of our stomach.
So here's how they can cause trouble. First, we eat them. Second, and this is really key, the dietary fat in that meal acts like a delivery vehicle, helping to shuttle these endotoxins from our gut straight into our bloodstream. And once they're in our blood, they activate these special receptors on our cells that act like a tripwire for our immune system, kicking off this low-grade chronic inflammatory response.
And here's what that looks like on a molecular level. That endotoxin molecule, the LPS, is like a key, and it fits perfectly into a specific lock on the surface of our cells called the toll-like receptor 4. Now, when that key turns the lock, it sounds an inflammatory alarm inside the cell. Just imagine that alarm going off softly but constantly, day after day. That's the exact kind of chronic inflammation that scientists have linked to things like atherosclerosis, the hardening of our arteries.
So let's connect the dots. What happens when we put the story of our elite athlete right next to this deep dive into cellular science? What's the big picture here?
Well, we basically end up with two sides of the same coin. For short-term, high-intensity stuff, that case study shows pretty clearly that having carbs available is critical for being efficient. And for our long-term health, the review paper lays out a clear biological pathway where parts of an animal-based diet can promote chronic inflammation, which we know is a major driver of heart disease.
So, what's the ultimate takeaway? It's really not about labeling foods as good or bad. It's about understanding that what we eat, and when we eat it, has a direct, measurable impact on our bodies, from a single soccer game all the way down to a lifetime of cellular health. This research really shows us that the connection between our plate and our performance, both today and decades from now, is way more profound than we might think. And it leaves us with a simple but really powerful question. What story is the food on your plate telling?